in the listing contract that says that with 180 or 120 or whatever number of days, as long as I tell you and put you on notice, that if you go behind me and try to buy the property later on, that I can be compensated. So another good reason to use that. Okay. Okay. Then we have the compensation plan. We've got the completion of the transaction if there's escrow, if the acquisition is prevented by the default of the buyer. Upon the buyer's default, you can get paid, or if it's prevented by a party to the transaction under the buyer, when the buyer collects the damages from a settlement or things like that, you can still get paid. Okay, the buyer's obligation to pay the compensation is explicit. However, if anyone other than the buyer compensates the broker for services covered by the agreement, then the amounts to be credited. So again, you have this thing where you can show your buyers you're not going to be double dipping. Okay. All right, and then I love this. Buyer includes any person or entity other than the broker related to the buyer who in any manner acts on the buyer's behalf to acquire the property described in paragraph 4. This is great because when you have somebody that end runs you by getting their attorney involved, and then they say, well, but you don't have an agreement with my attorney. Yes, you do, because I'm in here. Okay, and then we also have G, and this is again this come to the table, which some people just they go, ugh. Buyer has not previously entered into a representation agreement with another broker regarding the property described, unless specified as follows, and then you're going to have the other broker here, and you're going to have some kind of agreement. Buyer warrants that the buyer has no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker regarding the property, unless he gets these other properties, or so if you've got somebody who's had an agreement with somebody else, they still could have that agreement with somebody else, but if they are agreeing not to buy those properties for you and they want to go ahead with you in something new, just fill it in so that everything's on the table. Very transparent, everybody understands where everybody's going. And the other thing it's going to tell you is that particularly in some of our higher end properties where people say, well, we already did this offer to so-and-so, we're still trying, hoping we'll get it, and no, great, write it down, this is the property, this is what they're going to pay, you know about it, you can have who the other broker is, and if they go and they finally buy that other property, the arrow won't go in quite so far. It still goes in.
Annette, if you do have a situation like that, what do you recommend your involvement with the other broker be?
Well, it depends if we live in a small enough community. I would call you up and say, Julianne, I think I've got a problem here, or not a problem, but here's what's going on. Picked up these buyers, they want to work with me, but I understand they have an agreement with you concerning the Strand or something in Hermosa. Mm-hmm. Where are you on it? What's happening? And you're going to say, we've got a good chance, or you're going to say, oh, you know what? At the price they want to pay,
Can you ask for a copy of their contract that they've signed with him? Not the purchase contract, but
you could ask.
Yeah. Well, see, you're nice and normal, and I'm talking about icky agents.
Yeah. Well, you can always ask, but will you get it? Is there any obligation for the other company to give you it? No. Okay. But you can always ask.
But I could ask the buyer, and it wouldn't be anything slimy on my part if they gave it to me.
No,
right?
just if you run into a buyer, this is a really good part of this, because if you run into a buyer where somebody maybe has had an ongoing relationship with another broker concerning one parcel or something like that, then you could say to them, okay, because they're going to tell you about it anyway, you could say, well, would you mind sharing the contract with me? Because I'd like to look at what?
Compensation.
Well, the expiration dates.
Well, that too, yeah.
So,
okay.
It's like when I used to go on expired listings, I'd always look at the old contract, if they'd let me see it, the old listing agreement, so I know what's going on.
But the VRE, they can't cancel. In writing, right? The buyer can't cancel in writing.
You can't cancel in writing, but you're going to be, if you're working on specific properties, which we already talked about, then you can make it specific properties. Now
that's my question in a nutshell, though, is if the buyer is telling me, because I actually had this happen similar last year, that they have a particular property only that they've been jerking me around on. And so if I were to contact the other agent, she or the buyer should at least be willing to show that to me, right?
Well, they should, but let me just say they should, but they're not in any obligation. But let me tell you, let me give you a good case scenario of how this worked one time. I had some people who wanted to buy something very specific in Palos Verdes Estates, a very specific area, and there was only like 7 parcels we identified, and we identified them in the BRE. Okay, they were also working on a parcel in Paseo del Mar with another broker, which they told me about. And the chances of them getting this other parcel because it wasn't really listed and the people were not really thinking they'd want to sell was slim to none, okay? But as it turns out, in the course of everything happening, the Paseo Del Mar finally came, and I just had to back off because that was not part of my transaction. But, did I know about Paseo Del Mar? Yes. Was I on top of it? Yes. I was doing my job for the people, but I wasn't like, you know, I mean, I only had 7 things they wanted to look at anyway, so it was just that kind of thing, because they're all building sites. So, but it's very, very much better than the old way it used to be, which is, you know, the fatal phone call. Hi, Annette, we just bought such and such, you know.
Yeah, thanks for your help.
I'm
Yeah.
excited for us.
Yeah.
What if they
Or-
just put in the price range and not the property address?
You know, then you're going to have a little bit more loosey-goosey situation. That's why I like to be, when I get to the BRE, the BRNN I don't care about. When I get the BRE, I'm very specific about what we're doing. And I, you know, so I mean, you know, if you're to a point where you're showing the properties and things like that, then I would say something like, if you want to do a price range, great. But I would include everything from, you know.
LAX to San Pedro.
Yeah, right.
So you can't say list all properties, all prices on a BRE when you want to buy a broker with your buyer.
You could put a price range and, you know, area 141 through 197 or whatever it is on the other side of the hill.
So what if they change the areas, would you get a whole new
Then,
agreement or
yeah, sure you
add to
would.
it?
Yeah. Get a new agreement or change. I get a new agreement.
But isn't it also accurate to say if you purchase anything in the next year, you're going to owe me a commission?
Yeah.
Sure, as long as you can, as long as they're not, the only time you're going to have people exclude things from this and have a problem, I think, is when they've already been doing something
Right,
else.
okay.
And if they have a signed BRE with another agent, can they sign 2 BREs with 2 different agents, and you gotta be
That's a
more
good question.
specific?
You got to be
Then-
very, very specific in those cases. So when you come back to, let's go back to
And
here.
that's not stepping on toes?
No. When you get back right to here,
As long as you both get
it
paid.
says, what is it? Wire warrants, where is it? No, this is that page.
Right there, G2.
Yeah, G2. Buyer warrants that the buyer has no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker regarding property described in paragraph 4 unless the buyer acquires the following properties. So here's our property to be acquired down here, okay? Any purchase, lease, or any acquisition of any real property or manufactured home described as follows. Price range, da-da-da-da. And if you want to, June, I would put area 141 to whatever you think you're going to be covering with them.
But you could leave that blank, and now they're obligated to anything they buy with you for the time period. If they are not in
Not if you
another.
leave it blank.
Well, it's not if you leave it blank.
It says-
Put any and all properties?
You can put any and all. I mean, you can do whatever you can get them to sign, as far as I'm concerned.
That's what I've
Any residential
Any
property.
Any and all?
Well,
Yeah.
it
And
already
not
says
shown,
any
not
property.
just shown by you.
any and
Any and
all,
all
any
properties.
property you purchase, actually what I said to live in, because that was the situation at the time, for the next year.
And then all
Period.
prices, right?
And you know what, the
So-
truth is, it's like Annette says, if they're honest and open and good people, they're gonna be happy to sign it, they're not even gonna wanna spend too much time discussing it. They wanna do what they gotta do for you and get out and look at stuff.
The thing is, what you've got here is you've got 2 different paragraphs, 1 and 2, that they are warranting to you, they are promising to you that they have no obligation to pay compensation, okay? You're home free with them. If there's a glitch or there's an exception, let's know about it now, let's put it on the table, and let's know what our expectations are.
So are you having them sign the BRN and the BRE?
I just have to sign the BRNN when I first meet them, and then I sign the BRE as soon as possible. Okay? And the only reason I signed it, I don't use the BRE all the time. I use it when I find out I think I'm going to need it. Okay? And the minute I start talking to builders, or I start going outside the MLS, or even, you know, right now, I mean, Dawn can attest to this, we've got this huge statewide MLS thing going on, and the compensation agreements may or may not be holding up, so you've got to be very careful. If you're going into another MLS system, you know, I always send over a compensation agreement just to protect myself. Same thing with this.
So it kind of gives you a reason to go to them for the BRE,
Yeah.
like you're explaining.
Yeah.
I've had good luck lately. There's a form that you usually use for a listing agreement to extend the time period.
Mm-hmm.
But it also says on there, it may also be used for a buyer representation agreements.
Mhm.
And so I've had good luck with asking people to sign the exclusive, but for like, depending on how I feel that they feel about me, 2 or 3 weeks.
That's good.
Period. Then I'm covered, and I explain it all, but I said, you know, we're kind of going steady. We're not getting married
Right.
here, we're just
That's
going
good.
steady.
Oh,
And then when, by that time, when the time comes up, I just slip, oh, I need another piece of paper signed, this just extends our agreement, and then I'll put it in for like 6 months.
What form is that?
It's the
Extension of time.
time
Oh, that
agreement.
one.
Yeah.
But if they sign, a buyer signs with Julianne and BRE, all properties purchased 1 year, I can't touch it. I
Right.
can't touch them.
Not unless they happen to be willing to pay both of us.
Yeah.
Or have it down there.
But the thing is that, let's just go back to this for a minute. Let's say that Julianne has this buyer signed up, and you never get to the BRE. You're never gonna know that Julianne has this signed up, are you?
You're gonna sell them a house and not get paid.
And so you could sell them a house and not get paid. That's why
Oh, that would be-
I'm saying, one of the
Because they
things,
can cancel the day before they sign the contract.
So that's where you should ask
They
them,
could totally
because if
lie
they
to
lie
you
about
as
it,
well.
Mhm.
Of course they can.
We're assuming
They
that
don't
they
do
read
that.
what they signed originally anyway.
Right.
They may not even know they're
Why
on the
would you
hook
still
for
bring your
something.
Well, that's the thing.
But
I have
that's-
a buyer right now that keeps telling me, I'm not gonna read all this. I said, you have to read all
Right.
this. You have to understand what you're signing up for.
I think one of the things that you've got to do with the, you've got to figure out your buyers. I mean, first-time buyers, if you try to throw the BRE at a first-time buyer, they're just going to go, woo, I'm out of here. But if you work through the BRNN and then you work into it, I'm going back to this young couple that I worked with that finally bought Allison's place. We actually looked at a property that was not listed, that I had a lead on, and I did a BRE specifically for that property, just for that one address. And they were okay with that, because I said, I'm going to ask the seller to pay me, but if the seller isn't going to pay me, then we'll put the commission into the price and I will get compensated from escrow. Okay? And that was non-threatening to them. Okay? So, I mean, there's no hard and fast rules about this, but if you know what these contracts say and you know how to use them, we'll do that. I'm just going to go quickly more through this. Just remember, we have the same broker's authorization obligations, scope of the broker's duties, and then we're going to buyer's obligations. But again, let me remind you, it has the indemnity. It also, the BRE has the mediation. Mandatory mediation is assumed in the contract, just like the mediation in listing and RPAs. And you have a arbitration, again in the 10-point bold type, again following all the laws. Again, buyers have to initial, broker has to initial, and I highly recommend you do that. And then, the time to bring legal action, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then remember also, you have the attorney's fees. Prevailing parties will be responsible for attorney's fees. Okay? So this is the best thing you could, as far as I'm concerned, this is the best contract we've gotten to now. It's gone through a lot of iterations. I think it's the one that's going to probably protect you the most. I think you just have to, my recommendation to you would be to start with the BRNN. First of all, my homework for you is that all of these forms are on Win Forms. You need to pull them up. You need to download them. You need to print them out. You need to read them. I mean, there's no, I'm absolutely amazed that when I say to people, well, what's the contract say? And I'm talking to agents, that you don't know what your contracts say. So the most important thing you can do for yourself to stay out of trouble is that you need to know what the contract says, and then you need to take the time to explain it to your clients. And June brings up a very good point, which is a lot of people say, well, I'm too busy, I don't want to sign. Pam. I'm sorry, Pam. Just
Blonde, pretty much you.
Everybody's blonde here. But what happens, though, is that you get in a court of law, and you say in deposition, well, he said he didn't want to read it. And then you're going to have an attorney going at you about what is your obligation, what are you supposed to be doing, da-da-da-da-da-da. The point is, when you have somebody like that, I think you've got to say to that person, you know what, I'm doing my job for you. I really want to be a good broker for you, but we need to work through these documents. If you don't have time right now, then let's set aside some time when we can do it. Or if you don't have time right now, let's have you look at the contracts and get back to me with questions and things like that. And then when they take it home to look at the questions and they come back and they say everything's fine, then I'll say, well, what did you think about the arbitration agreement? So I'm going to know what. Did they ever read it?
Read it.
Yeah.
So how can a buyer cancel a BRE?
It really goes with the end of the transaction.